my fellow readers, this is I, Dark Symphony 777, with the fan fiction review. As always, a link to the story, as well as my Discord, will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts on the story, and any future fan fictions you want me to read or review. And finally, this story is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. So, wrestling. So this story was actually suggested by a commenter earlier. I just didn't have a lot of time to go about it because when I got the suggestion, I was actually in the middle of reading Angseth, so I was, and not to mention with everything with my job, constantly having to work mornings, it put a really big damper on trying to read and do videos. And now my laptop's just completely breaking down, so I can't literally. This is probably going to be my last review. Just a review until I get a new laptop, so that way I can get it, so that way it works better and stuff like that. I'm gonna do readings, but at least for reviews, those are just gonna be put on temporary hold. Video game footage, they're gonna be put on temporary hold simply because I don't have the mic anymore to record. But other than that, I'll be doing readings most of the time. I do have a couple parts of my Spider-Man Let's Play in my USB right here. There. So I'll be able to do at least a couple more videos for buffers. So the story I am reviewing is called ACW Season 1, Hope vs. Despair by Ash Writes 99. I just realized my card's bad. So, this is kind of a weird story, because when it comes to wrestling fan fictions, it's very rare you actually get wrestling fan fictions that actually talk about wrestling and actually do wrestling. Most of the time, it's just blatant Mary Sue character, author, avatar thing, falls in love with their favorite male wrestler, most likely John Cena, because John Cena. Falls in love, has implied sex, or actually showing the sex, and then girl getting pregnant, and there we go. Or we get yaoi. Lots of yaoi. Like lots of yaoi. I think I read actually a bunch of wrestling fan fictions years ago, and out of the ones that didn't involve like either yaoi or Mary Sue's falling in love, I had so much trouble just trying to find a story that wasn't those two things. It's not even funny. There were a couple, I did review a couple in the past. There's also the ATM series, which is mostly a religious story series, but also a very hilarious one, based on what I remember about it. But this is an author's actual attempt of making a wrestling promotion. So this review is going to be very different, simply because of how the story is structured and how there's a lot of moving parts. So I was actually supposed to review it yesterday, but I had to go to work, and my little brother and sister got kicked into a fight, so, why it's not letting me, okay, there we go. I'm trying to go to the first chapter, here we go. So, let's start to the plot while I'm, loading chapter 1 and chapter 2, because a lot of stuff involves those two chapters specifically. Specifically, a lot of stuff that's really wrong with the story can be traced back to these two first chapters. So, first off, how the story is structured. The plot is actually kind of decent. The author tried to go for something like a Lucha Underground-esque story, where instead of, like cartels and supernatural stuff like that, we basically got a world that is ruled by darkness, that was plunged into darkness by a faction called Despair. They basically, I guess you could say, kind of took over the world. It's it's really ambiguous, which I think kind of weakens the plot a little bit, because we don't know what they did. They just said, oh, they plunged the world into darkness. Okay, what did they do specifically? They murdered a lot of people. Oh, okay, but that's just murder. That's just terrorism. What they do? Did they take over the world? No, we don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You didn't like what they do. It's like, they killed a bunch of people. You said that, but that's not explaining everything. They killed a woman who happened to be the mother of the president of the United States. Right. But what they do after that? They became a gang? What? Are you trying to copy Lucha Underground? No. No. You're copying Lucha Underground. No. Shut up. Johnny Mundo's the greatest wrestler ever. No, it's Chris Jericho. Everyone knows the greatest wrestler in the world of all time is Chris Jericho because there's only one Chris Jericho ever. You'll never, ever. Why did I do that? I don't know. Be another Chris Jericho. I had no idea where I went with that. I guess since I always go off topic, I thought my mind just goes, well, might as well get it over with this little sketch. All right, then. So, we have this gang called Despair, who we don't even know what they did outside of, like, 10 students shot up and murdered everyone in the school. And then, supposedly, they kind of destroyed the world. I don't know, the plot is kind of very ambiguous about that. And so the president, this guy named Richard Montoya, decides the only way to beat this gang is to make a wrestling promotion. Yeah, that's it. There we go. We'll make a wrestling promotion where the good guys can beat up Despair. Nothing can go wrong. That is literally the plot. I do like the idea of it. Like, it's basically like Yu-Gi-Oh! In a way. It's like we're gonna save the world, and I'm gonna kill you. How are we gonna do it? I'm gonna challenge you to a children's card game. Instead of that, it's I'm gonna save the world. I'm gonna stop you. How are we gonna stop us? In a wrestling match. Okay. And so the idea is kind of there. I mean, it does borrow a lot from Lucha Underground. For those of you who don't know, Lucha Underground was a wrestling show that debuted on the El Rey Network around 2015, around that point, and it was praised a lot for successfully combining proper soap opera-esque storylines with actual wrestling. Like, wrestling was just a backdrop. A lot of people just really liked Lucha Underground for the stories they were telling. It did very, very good in that regard, something a lot of people kind of threw shade at Vinnie Mac and WWE for. Saying, these guys can do a proper soap opera story better than you, and in about a third of the time, too. So, we're sports entertainers, but they can do better stories than you. So the story has these two factions, Hope and Despair. Really 4 factions, because there's also the Nomads, which are basically like more neutral parties, like Asherut, like Ferno Moxley, and like everyone else, like the rich guys and stuff like that. And then you also had Anarchy, who kind of show up a little bit in the story, and basically like anti-heroes. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the main characters are 2 wrestlers by the name of Jason Sabre and Cyrus Dietrich. So it's basically like them constantly butting at heads, Cyrus constantly tricking Jason, and Jason having to doubt himself over the fact that, he's the ultimate, like, Cyrus kept, kind of slamming the door in his face and he wanted to be the ace, like, the guy who's on top of everything, and slowly kind of going to the dark side. It was lackluster at best, nothing really wrong, but it's like, for what the author was trying to go for, it should have been done a lot better. So that's the plot. Now, is there anything wrong with the plot? It's more how it's implemented. I'll talk about that at the end. Characters. this is where we get into the really, really bad part of the story. Like, it's not so much. First off, if you actually go onto the story, I'll be leaving a link. I'll be leaving a link to it. If you go to the first chapter, the author actually hosts an open forum. Let's see. I accidentally went to chapter 2. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, the app. Basically. There's alignments to despair, which is bad guys, upper class. It's just rich people. Hope, this is good. They're like the good guys, and nomadic are just basically they're just basically like like middle ground. And then the author actually does an open forum, like nicknames, if any, name, gender, hometown, height, weight, physical moveset, must have 10 moves, finishers, type of wrestler, theme song, alignment, face or heel. Like, first off, why is alignment and face and heel kind of weird? That's actually really weird. What?
I'm going.
Okay, bye. Bye. I want to do videos with no one around. That's so hard. So, however, a problem. I got distracted by my mom. Sorry about that. However, problems arise not so much from the quality of the characters, but the quantity. Now, kind of constantly comparing it to Lucha Underground is I wish I could actually pause this. I wish I could actually pause the video. Lucha Underground has a fairly small cast. It had about season 1 had about 20 wrestlers at whole. But if you go on chapter 2, you had 1, 2, 3. Oh. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. It is 37 characters. So it's around 10 more characters than in Lucha Underground. But they're also divided by divisions, a male division and a female division, which is completely counterproductive, considering the fact the show only has 3 matches and does a lot of cutscenes. So the story is trying to capture a genuine Lucha Underground-esque vibe, but the author doesn't succeed at that because we're giving a lot of very flat characters. Not to mention, outside of these, like the one I'm looking at, oh my god. There is also a lot of characters that kind of show up like out of nowhere and become actual characters. There is just nothing. There's also the fact we don't really know. Usually with open forum stories, you have to cherry pick a certain number. Otherwise, you risk kind of being overwhelmed by a lot of bad characters. Which is kind of weird because if you actually look through chapter 2, like the first one that shows up, Jason Sabre, the ace of pro wrestling, a nomad who has every reason to fight against despair but decides not to. He is considered selfish and doesn't seem to care much else other than his own success. He wasn't looking for war, but war found him and he'll take down the entire army, even if he has to do it himself. And yet we don't like literally over half the characters on this chapter 2. We don't see their backstory. We don't see their moveset. Honestly, it looks like everyone literally went for like monkey spot stuff, like the high flyer stuff like that. They literally just stuck with them. We don't really have any need for all these characters, especially with the type of story you're going for. Compare that with an earlier wrestling story I did, Storm Warning, which only had on one wrestler and basically just him going through various feuds. That's basically the story. It's presented more in the WWE context style of storytelling, but still captured an actual feel for wrestling. Well, this one tries to do it, but is more. But the author becomes completely overwhelmed with the sheer amount of characters, and what's worse, more characters are constantly added in. If I had to say add all the characters that show up throughout the entire story, you're looking at about around 50 characters. That is way too much. Like, there's a lot of characters that show up in the story that kind of become mainstays, but are not on this list, like Papa Hawk, the Snake Tribe, Richard Montoya. He's not even on all the cartel members. None of them are not on this list, but show up anyway, with just the sheer quantity that the author seems to be favoring over quality. Like, when it comes to with wrestling, there is a lot of moving parts. There's storyline you have to do. There's characters you have to develop in the context of the actual story. There is appearances. We don't even know what any of the characters look like. Like, despite the fact the author said one of the things you have to mention is what the character looks like, what their moveset, what's their what moves, what their finishers. We don't really know what any of the characters look like outside of about 2, maybe 3 characters, which is not doing a story based on something as aesthetically pleasing as wrestling, where a lot of people only really most of the time remember wrestlers based off their appearance. Like, in wrestling, appearance goes a long way, and the fact that we don't know what the characters look like doesn't exactly help the storyline. Like to mention, there's also the commentary, which are trash. The pacing, a lot of stuff is wrong with the story, but all of it can be traced back to the fact the author just got really overwhelmed by the sheer number of characters that the author had to introduce, wherein, the Lucha Underground, it only had a very small cast. It only had about 3 championships, just like this one. However, there wasn't division. There was only a single division and a tag division. The women had no problem fighting the men. The men had no problem fighting the women. There was only 3 champions. There was the Grand Championship. There was the Trios Championship, and then the Gift of the Gods Championship, which is basically the Wildcard Championship in ACW. Also, some of the characters are really, really similar, like Jason Sabre. He's basically just a knockoff Kenny Omega. Roman McIntyre, the author's not even trying to hide the fact that he's Roman Reigns. Like, he's literally Roman Reigns. Like, you just had Roman Reigns just replace his last name with McIntyre. That is literally it. He does the roar, he does the pump fist, he does the Superman punch, his finisher is a spear, literally just like Roman Reigns. There are XPs and then they're just ripoffs. That is bad character design. It's fine if you're having a character that is inspired by other characters, because there's so many characters nowadays, you kind of have to do it. But if you're so blatantly ripping off the character to the point you actually has his name just pretty much copy and paste, then it just doesn't reek of creativity. Especially in the context of the story, since it's literally Roman Reigns. Like they're not even trying. The author is not even hiding that fact. Not to mention, at the end of the story, we had like 3 wrestlers. They made Hounds of Justice basically a ripoff of the Shield because everything in the story has to be ripped off. And finally, the commentators are badly written characters. Neither of them one is just overly annoying and completely unneeded, and the other one's just plain old boring. David is basically like, okay, so how far? Okay, I'm at 20 minutes. Commentary is a very, very hard position to do. That's why, even in the very few wrestling fan fictions I read that have wrestling, they don't really go through the commentary that much. Because it's, most of the part, it's unneeded, it's unnecessary. It also is really, really immersion breaking if you're listening to a wrestling match, and all of a sudden, like randomly the commentators start talking. It's gonna really break up the flow of what's going on, which I appreciate the fact the author is trying to do something different. The problem is of how the commentary works. So commentary works by having 2 people sit on a commentary desk and talking about what's happening in the ring. There is the play-by-play commentator, and then there's the color commentator. Like the most famous duo of that is JR Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler, all the way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Attitude Era, and probably like the very, very early years of the Ruthless Aggression Era. Now, they made it work. Basically, the role of the play-by-play commentator is supposed to be talking about the moves that are going inside the ring, as well as, trying to advance the story through the use of the moves. Like, okay, he's trying to aim for the spear, that may end it. While the color commentator is supposed to, justify their actions and more get into the moveset, but also, most importantly, try and advance the story along through what's happening in the story. That doesn't happen in the story. Most of the time, they just rattle about and draw everything away, which is something you should not be doing. Like Evan Neal, the color commentator, he mainly just brags about himself, as well as saying, "Oh, I like this guy. I don't like this guy. I like this guy," which is a good heel commentary. But the fact, it's also really, really annoying because he does it too much. He doesn't focus on the story instead of focusing more on himself. Like when Michael Cole in 2011 did the same thing, everyone hated it. Like literally everyone hated it. Even like the people who understand, oh, he's supposed to heal. Everyone genuinely hated it. I believe even Michael Cole hated that part because of the simple fact he was more of a play-by-play announcer, and now he's just basically trying to do color commentary despite having years more experience as play-by. So, I'm actually pulling up a picture that's actually going to be important a little bit. So, there is so much wrong with the characters because going through the plot, like the main plot, because the reason I didn't talk too much about the plot is mainly because a lot of the plot is connected to the characters, like how wrestling should be. So you have about 4 main plots. There is the Hope versus Despair plot, there is the Natalie Diamond Dust plot, there is the Cartel plot, and then there's the Anarchy plot. All 4 of these plots are actually pretty flawed in their own right. Let's go through the list. First off, the Hope versus Despair. Hope is constantly painted like a loser despite being the ultimate good guys who need to stand up. They're constantly being painted as losers. They're always losing to Despair, no matter how hard they try. Contrast that to Despair, who are a bunch of boring nothings. Like, it's so hard to be invested in the story, where, like, the most 3-dimensional character that is Jason Sabre, who was neutral and only really becomes Despair because Destiny says so, despite, that's fine, it's just fine, it's just really bland. Among the characters in that story, we have Cyrus Dietrich, he's okay. Jason Saber, despite being a literal rip-off of Kenny Omega, he's okay. Despite the fact I really didn't like the fact the author decided to put in Judas by Fozzy and the last minute. Is like, that's really unnecessary. Not to mention that's Chris Jericho's song. Only Chris Jericho should be allowed to use Chris Jericho songs because he's Chris Jericho. Back to that. Azrael, the main villain of the story, he's boring. He just sits around, does nothing, and barks orders, and just acts like a big guy. He just acts like a monster heel. So it's like, okay, that is fine. That is nothing really wrong with that. It's just very boring. Micaiah Hyde, boring. Giselle, the woman who kind of crushed Jason, boring. All the characters are boring except for maybe Azrael, and that's because he's supposed to be kind of boring because because he's more of a monster heel, like a monster guy, rather than like high flying or technical or strong style stuff like that. So it kind of, being a stoic guy kind of works for him. The second story, Natalie versus Diamond Dust. This storyline is let down by the fact that Natalie is nothing. She's just there. I mean, she's the most boring thing I've ever. She's one of the most boring characters I've ever seen in fan fiction ever. At least Cyrus and Jason, at least that story, they at least had somewhat characters. They were bland, yes, but at least they have personality. Natalie is just there. And for literally most of the story, she's just there constantly getting shook up by Diamond Dust, who's supposed to be like this sexual provocateur in the vein of Gold Dust. It's supposed to be kind of like a more adult version of the Mickie James Trish Stratus storyline from like 2005, where Mickie James kind of debuted as a big fan of Trish Stratus, and then says "I love you" and becomes like a psycho lesbian. And then we got like the censored image of literally Mickie James decided to grab Trish's crotch and just lick her hands. Like, yeah, man, Mickie stays kind of sold that. This is basically supposed to be a more adult version of that, and in that regards, this is probably the best of the storylines. Which is weird saying that because it's carried by Diamond Dust. Diamond Dust is actually a pretty good character. She's basically an improvement. She's basically a combined version of Gold Dust and the psycho lesbian Mickie James. So she's constantly provocative. She's overly flashy, constantly doing the mind game, but also acting like a very jealous stalker who actually gains a sadistic side as the story goes along. She slowly. Like, when she realizes that Natalie doesn't want her, she just like, okay, I don't love you anymore. I'm just gonna try and destroy you as much as I can, which was actually a pretty good character arc with her. And also, there's also the third wheel, Aaron Frost, who's basically just a hippie. I don't know why, but I seem to actually like Aaron Frost simply because I always seem to like hippie characters for some reason. Not to mention the whole idea of her actually considering the Wii Fit trainer a god. Like, hey, you gotta understand my deity, the Wii Fit trainer. I'm like, okay, I don't know why, but that's actually kind of funny. Okay. And so that one's actually the strongest simply for Aaron and Diamond Dust because Diamond Dust is actually a really good character, and Aaron Frost, despite is more of a minor character, she pulls enough weight to kind of, help the story drag along at a very good pace. Then there's the cartel story, which stars the rich guys being hunted by cartel by this. Basically, the story goes, this guy, Freddy Escobar, he ran a crooked business and became the only person to screw over this big cartel boss before the cartel boss kind of gets soft and wanted to retire. And and the cartel boss' daughter took over, started murdering everyone connected to Freddy, and wants to ruin his life for simply having the audacity to be the one that got away. So it's like, okay, we have a kind of okay story. But it's let down by the fact it's completely rushed through. This was a story that needed a lot of time to build, and there's not enough stuff that happens to really justify what happens. Like we're introduced to Freddy. He's kind of he's a rich guy who constantly opens his mouth, inserts foot, always loses, despite not wanting to. And he's constantly losing, and then he wants to marry Talia, and then it's eventually discovered that he only wants to marry her to possibly get out, despite the fact it makes it look like he really does love her. And he has this weird friendship with Caesar Montana, who's like this really big, lovable. He's basically Freddy Escobar's bodyguard, and he has a really endearing quality. I actually like Freddy Escobar. He's actually a really lovable goof who genuinely tries, and he's like kind of, despite being a really big guy, supposedly he's like a really, really bad guy, a really, really big guy. He's basically just a big softie. And Freddy and Caesar's kind of growing, progressing friendship, like over the course of the story, Freddy, despises Caesar simply because you're not rich, and then seeing Caesar constantly stand up to him time and time again, kind of warms up Freddy. So it's like we have a character arc with these two, and not to mention Freddy is a pretty decent character in his own right. He's not as good as Diamond Dust, but I actually really loved Freddy and Caesar's characters. JCB. He's there. The cartel members, they're just completely there. They're supposed to be generic bad guys. Fine, I guess, but there's really no reason to add them. They were just there to unnecessarily pad up the story. But the story was completely rushed through everything. And then finally, we have the Anarchy arc, which is basically this group of anarchists led by this guy named Ash Russo wants to take down the president because apparently the president was the one who kind of started the whole thing with like despair, like picking the 10 children to kill everyone. But it turned out it was actually this Mekhi Hyde who set everything up and tricked everyone. So he's kind of the bad guy behind the bad guy. Ash Russo doesn't care about that. He doesn't realize that Mekhi is really the bad guy, and so it's basically just a typical anti-hero versus authority figure storyline. Nothing really revolutionary. The fact that Ash Russo kind of goes more heel as the story goes along, that's at least a little wrinkle, but overall is underwhelming simply for the fact that we don't really see any, because of the simple fact it progresses to the story so fast that we don't really get a feel for the characters. Now, there's other characters outside of that. There's Ray Kirian, who's basically a joke character, but he's a badly done joke character. Like, he's supposed to be like this overly fat guy who, he's supposed to be, but that's not how it, but he's just there. He's just very cringy. Despite the fact at the end, it looks like the author is trying to do some kind of story with him, like these two wrestlers from other countries like are trying to prove that this guy can win a match. We're gonna help him train. So it's like, okay, maybe in season 2 there might be something more done with him that actually may make him a better character. But Ray Kirian is a joke. He's basically a very, very badly done character. There's also CJ Hawk, whose whole gimmick is, hey, I'm just a wrestler, not X, or I'm not an X, I'm just a wrestler. His gimmick is basically just wrestler. Okay, but then there's Papa Hawk, who is hilarious. Like he actually, if not for Diamond Dust and Caesar, he'd probably be. You know what? Papa Hawk is probably the best character because he's literally a classical heel in the vein of like Freddie Blassie. It's like it's like that. He's very braggadocios. He constantly insults his son CJ. Like anytime he shows up, it's like, and he's so over the top, you can't help but like the guy. He's like, I wish you were like my other son. I have about 10 sons. I wish you were like every other of them. And he just so acts like a typical douchebag heel manager that he's actually very entertaining. He's probably the overall best character, despite the fact he's an actual better joke character than the joke character. And he's bringing in like all these other wrestlers, stuff like that. So overall, we have a bunch of the majority of the characters are completely one-dimensional or boring, and we have about 5 characters: Papa Hawk, Diamond Dust, Aaron Frost, Caesar, and Freddy. 5 characters that are pretty much the only good characters, except outside of Aaron, they don't really show up enough to really get a feel for the characters. Hence, another ratchet in how wrestling is this ultra twisting, turning, like show business. Like, there's so many moving parts that it's so hard to make an actual, fan fiction or even literature that has all these parts. It's just hard because it's one of those things that does never really translate to the written word. It's just that hard. Now, grammar. Bro. The grammar error. So many grammar errors. It was there. There's a lot of grammar errors. I'm not a grammar Nazi, but even I'm stumped at the sheer monumental amount of grammar errors that are in the story. There is not a single chapter, except for the first 2, and even then, I'm pretty sure I didn't get a clear look at the first chapter. There is a grammar error in every single, multiple grammar errors in every single chapter. That is just completely illogical. There's just that many. That many. Oh my god, it's just crazy. So that's it with grammar errors. If you're a grammar Nazi, avoid the story, at all costs. Pacing. This is where we get into the really, really nitty-gritty of this, because the pacing can be stretched out into 2 parts: the non-wrestling segments and the wrestling segments. I'm going to start with the wrestling segments. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a viral tweet released by some, I believe it was an old school wrestler who wanted to comment on the state of independent wrestling. I actually pulled up the tweet. Every indie match now: handshake, drawn out move exchange, this is awesome chant, strike exchange, dive, no sell indie strong style, dive, more strikes, no sells, dive, flippy floppy sequence, dive, hit everyone with each other's finisher, then Humpty Dumpty we all fall down, fight forever chant, rinse and repeat until every move is useless and means nothing, dive, take unsafe shot that looks like shit and hurts like hell, then roll up finish, handshake and hug after match, everyone's hands raised, all these guys chant, go home and type on social media thanking your opponents and company for the match and telling others they should book these guys, dive. That's basically all these matches. Now, I'm going to actually be real with you. This is basically a symptom of oversaturation. Oversaturation is when you include so much stuff of the same thing over and over again that it becomes boring after a while. And so when you start reading through each of these matches, it completely blends together, and you're in the first, and all the matches are literally the same. By this, they don't do the handshake, but it's just they hit all these constant big moves, and nothing means anything, and they're so very, and literally it's all a bunch of hot monkey spots wrestlers. They're all monkey spot wrestlers except for Caesar and Azrael, and even Caesar does a lot of unnecessary flippy shit. There's really not any technical wrestlers. There's not really any other, let's see. Yeah, type of wrestler: powerhouse, technician, high flyer, or brawler. None of them, pretty much all of them are high flyers, because high flyers, the flippy shit, they're the ones that kind of get the most looked at. Because how do they do that? When Ricochet and Will Ospreay, they did that very infamous match where they did a bunch of flippy shit. A lot of people did not like that simply because it was doing flippy shit for the sake of flippy shit. And that's pretty much kind of the case here. There is so much, like literally a match doesn't go by without saying ACW or this is awesome or fight forever. It gets annoying after a while. So after about like the first chapter, like around chapter 6, I literally started skipping the wrestling matches. And just focused on everything because all the wrestling matches, they just melded into one just constant, just really, really samey mess because all the wrestlers wrestled the same. You had, there are a couple outliers like Ash Russo, who is more of a brawler. Uh, Azrael was more of a powerhouse, but the vast majority of them were flippy wrestlers like that, and that includes the women. All of them were flippy wrestlers. And they all did, like tope con halos. They were doing suicide planchas, high five blows. Like, they all did all that. It's like, and there was nothing real. There was just, what is going on with this? And not to mention, the commentary didn't help. First off, they constantly kept mentioning the time limit, which was annoying because commentators are not supposed to mention the time limits unless, one, it's a very specific match type like Iron Man or Beat the Clock, or two, if there is a time limit. Because usually, and time limits actually still go on to this day. Like, if it's a main event and like the Tokyo Dome, they'll say this match had a 45-minute time limit or a 60-minute time limit. So that way, and so the commentators will once in a while mention what time it is to kind of keep that limit on your mind. So I'm saying, oh, it's getting close. Like, what's going to happen? It ratchets up the anticipation of a climax. Or thirdly, if a wrestler has, a well-known injury or is known for not really working long matches, so they will mention the time limit as a way to kind of build up suspension involving that wrestler, like Kurt Angle in his later career. And Kurt Angle was well known for actually having a really, really bad neck. So a lot of his later matches in WWE had him actually them mention the time limit every so once in a while whenever it reaches a certain point, so that we can mention the fact that, hey, he has a hurt neck, how long can he keep going on, and leading up to, Kurt Angle, powering out and being able to win the match. But they constantly mention the time limit unnecessarily. It drags the pacing down. All the wrestlers kind of sound the same. It was boring. It was like, why are we all saying this? Like, the only times I watch a wrestling match, I read a wrestling match, was if it was important to the series. I pretty much read all of Final Destination, the final, outside of the first match. I honestly think the first match was like, no, like the only nothing match. The cage match, I didn't read any of those stories because they just bled together into one very samey mess, and it was really, really annoying, and it honestly sped up the story a lot because there was just so much wrong with it. So outside of the wrestling, everything moved by way too fast. We didn't get a feel for what the characters act like. We didn't get a feel for, their motivations outside of a very select few. Everything was moving way, way too fast. The best stories are the ones we get to connect the characters. The ones that have logical storylines. But these stories moved way too fast to really get a feel and appreciate the characters that are trying to be the parts in them. And that really drags down the quality of the story. Probably the only praise I can give towards the author is the author actually writes a good wrestling match. That's really it. And I guess the idea is a pretty creative idea, but that's pretty much it. Everything else is bad to mediocre. And Papa Hawk. Because Papa Hawk is I just like Papa Hawk. And so favorite part. Let me finish pacing. The pacing is just a big jumbled mess of the author focusing too much time on the wrestling and not enough time on the characters themselves for us to truly appreciate the connection and connect them. Like, we didn't fall in love with Steve Austin like that. No, we fell in love with him over the course of months, over the course of about 2 years, like about a year and a half, because we didn't until like WrestleMania 13, that was when people started to love him. Like, we started loving him slowly over the course of the story. It was a logical story. But the pacing here is just so fast paced and so rushed that even when the characters are actually pretty good, the story is not. They're not helping out with the story to the point that nothing really matters. Like, that's the whole point of story. Like, we get invested into stories that are good. Like, and the wrestlers actually help that story. But the characters are so weak, and the stories are so fast paced that there's just nothing for us to truly appreciate outside of the wrestling matches, and they become completely homogenized and oversaturated a lot of readers will just often keep skipping them. Now, that is the full review. Would I recommend the story? Between the incredibly weak plots outside of the Natalie Diamond Dust plot and kind of sort of the Anarchy plot, a lot of the characters being very weak or very bad, outside of very, very few characters. I mean, 5 characters out of 50 plus characters. That is just a complete skewerment of bad characters. The bad pacing in terms of story, like outside of the wrestling. The very, very bad inconsistencies and very samey wrestling that happens. The megaton of bad grammar. I have to give the story no. I would not recommend the story at all, unless you are a hardcore wrestling fan and just want to read someone make good see if someone could actually write wrestling matches in literature form. Then go ahead and read the story and just read the wrestling parts. That is it. What would I change to fix? What would I do to change it? First off, get rid of the time limits. Second off, make the commentators more consistent. Actually tell a story inside the ring to help out with the story. Decrease the roster and focus more on a select group of characters. And finally, go more into detail on the actual stories. Like, give us their thoughts on what's happening. Like, go into their mindsets and everything. Because the author is trying to write this like an actual wrestling show. Like, we automatically know what they feel like. No, that only works on TV and animation because we can actually see their body language. We can interpret their body language on how they're acting. While in stories, you have to use their feelings and stuff like that. You have to actually interpret like how they're doing. Like, the author is making us do too much work on trying and guess what they're acting like in that situation. That is way, way too hard in literature. It's easier in visual mediums where we can actually see the characters react. But if you don't give us any sort of semblance, like outside of very, very vague hints, like the dialogue, then the characters, they fall apart. Everything just slowly crumbles. There's just so much wrong with the story. There's so much wrong with the story. I'm not even going to bother reviewing Season 2, mainly because, 1, it's not done, and even 2, it's just going to be more of the same. The only reason why I would want to read 2 is the Ray Kieran story, because that actually kind of piqued my interest, as well as continuing the Diamond Dust Natalie story. That's pretty much the only reason why I would want to read Season 2. And I'm sure as hell not going to review that story, unless I get a lot of people actually suggesting I go review that story. So, that is my review on ACW. This has been Dark Symphony 777, and